The fish in front of you doesn't think that's food. In fact, it doesn't think anything. And that's the interesting part. What actually happens in its brain in the split second it bites a piece of painted plastic dangling from a line is way more mechanical and strange than it looks. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what makes a wild animal, with survival instincts refined over millions of years, attack a $2 toy like it's dinner. Stop and think for a second how absurd this actually is. A shiny little metal spoon, no smell, no taste, nothing that should signal food, and yet thousands of years of fishing rely on exactly one fact: it works. Not once in 1,000 tries. Consistently. Across different species, different waters, different continents, and it's not just fish. Frogs leap after scraps of red paper tied to a string. Pike attack objects that resemble nothing found in nature. If this were a rational decision, that looks like food, so I'll eat it. The success rate should be way lower. It isn't. And the reason comes down to how these animals' brains are physically wired. First thing you need to understand, fish don't analyze a lure the way we'd size up a plate of food. There's no internal process like, what is this? Does it smell like anything edible? Instead, there's a strike reflex, a fast, almost automatic neural circuit that fires when three conditions line up at once: movement, shape, and contrast. If an object moves in a certain way, jerky, irregular, like wounded prey trying to escape, and its silhouette roughly matches the profile of a small fish or insect, the predator's brain reacts before any kind of double-check process even has a chance to kick in. In nature, that reflex is the difference between eating and starving. The problem is, it doesn't have a fine filter. It reacts to pattern, not substance. And that's exactly where humans step in, with a painted spoon engineered to check every box without actually being food. This is where things get genuinely fascinating, because lures don't just imitate prey, many of them exaggerate it. There's a concept from ethology called the supernormal stimulus, discovered nearly a century ago by researcher Nico Tinbergen. He found that certain birds, when given a choice between their own egg and an artificial copy that was bigger and more vividly colored, would almost always go for the exaggerated fake over their real egg. Something similar happens with fish. An artificial lure often has far brighter colors, far snappier movement, and far stronger vibrations than any prey found in nature. And paradoxically, that doesn't make it less attractive. It makes it more attractive. A predator's brain is wired to respond in proportion to signal intensity. The stronger the easy, vulnerable prey signal, the harder the strike reflex is to override. The lure isn't fooling the fish with subtlety. It's overwhelming it with a signal louder than anything evolution ever prepared it to recognize. Here's a detail most people don't know. Fish don't just see prey with their eyes. They have a sensory organ called the lateral line, a band of cells running along the body, visible as a faint stripe, capable of detecting the tiniest changes in water pressure and vibration. A fish can actually feel wounded prey in total darkness, just from how the water moves around it. And this is where well-made lures become deceptive on a physical level, not just a visual one. A spinner rotating correctly, or a crankbait built to produce a specific vibration pattern, replicates the exact energy signature of a stressed, injured, easy-to-catch baitfish. To the predator's lateral line, there's zero difference between that signal and one made by real prey. Physically, they're identical. Here's another counterintuitive piece. Fish don't always strike out of hunger. Many species, bass, pike, catfish, react aggressively to anything moving through what they consider their space, especially during spawning season, when territory becomes a resource worth actively defending. That explains why lures that look nothing like real prey, loud colors, bizarre shapes, combinations you'd never find in nature, still work sometimes. The fish isn't striking because it mistakes the lure for food. It's striking because it perceives an intruder or a threat that needs to be driven off or attacked. Territorial aggression is, in a sense, a second door lures can walk through, completely separate from the feeding instinct. In frogs, the phenomenon is even purer, in the sense that it's almost fully automated. Their visual system doesn't work like ours, where we take in a whole scene and interpret it. A frog's retina has what researchers call bug detectors, specialized cells that fire specifically in response to small dark objects moving abruptly through the visual field. When one of those cells activates, the tongue fires, essentially with no intermediate thinking stage at all. It's a pure motor reflex, triggered directly by a very specific type of visual signal. That's why the classic trick, a scrap of red paper or plastic jiggled the right way in front of a frog, works so well. It doesn't need to look like a real bug. It just needs to check the boxes its visual detectors are scanning for. Small, high-contrast, sudden movement. And yet, fish aren't entirely incapable of learning. This is where it gets interesting for anyone who fishes. Fish in heavily fished waters that have been caught and released before become noticeably more cautious. There are observations and studies suggesting some species learn to avoid certain colors, shapes, or even specific spots where they were previously caught. A kind of associative memory tied to the unpleasant experience of the hook. That's why a virgin lake, never fished before, produces faster, easier results than one that's been worked for years. The strike reflex stays intact. The animal still reacts instinctively to movement and shape, but its caution threshold rises. There's essentially a constant tug-of-war between the fast, automatic instinct to attack prey and a learned behavioral break built from experience. And that balance is what ultimately decides how easy or hard a fish is to catch. So, to recap, fish and amphibians aren't fooled because they're dumb. They're fooled because their instincts respond to patterns, movement, shape, contrast, vibration, not to substance. Lures are, essentially, reverse-engineered versions of those patterns, sometimes exaggerated to the point of becoming more attractive than reality itself. And if you think about it, the supernormal stimulus idea doesn't stop at fish. Ultra-processed food, phone notifications, social media feeds, all of these are, in a way, lures engineered to exploit million-year-old reflexes with a signal more intense than anything evolution ever designed us to handle. The difference is, we believe we're choosing rationally. The fish, at least, has the excuse of not having a choice. What's the weirdest lure you've ever used that worked way better than it had any right to? Drop it in the comments. Genuinely curious what you've seen firsthand.